Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Trek Canon. So, today we're going to be doing a review of Season 2, Episode 6 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds Lost in Translation. So, I decided to watch this particular episode with the missus, right? And tell me why halfway through this episode, she knew what was going on. I had a very good idea of what was going on in this episode. And that's because this episode touches heavily on two episodes of Star Trek canon. The first episode being, I think the episode was what, Night Terrors, Star Trek Next Generation. Anyway, so I wanted to explain what was going on in Night Terrors and in the other episode, Voyager's episode, Equinox. So before I get into this review, I just wanted to do a small recap on what happened in Night Terrors from the Next Generation and what happened in Equinox from Voyager. Now, in the episode Night Terrors, basically, Counselor Deanna Troy was they basically investigating this situation, man, with this other ship that had, I think, got destroyed or something like that. Man, they found one survivor, another Beta Zer from another ship. He was going crazy, wasn't able to really talk right, like he was tripping. Kept seeing hallucinations. Troy, we find out Troy's having these nightmares and everything like that, and it's just one person keeps talking about one moon circles the other. Now, come to find out in that episode is that the Enterprise and this alien ship, which they couldn't detect, was both trapped in this spatial anomaly. And the only way that they could communicate with the people of the Enterprise was through Counselor Troy's telepathic abilities. In that episode, like I said, you had the other betas there from the other ship that was kind of going crazy, losing its mind and everything like that from being exposed to this telepathic signal that the aliens was putting off. Even Counselor Troy started having the same issue. Now, in the episode Equinox from Voyager, what was going on there is that the Voyager crew comes across another Federation starship, the Equinox, that had found a way to use transdimensional beings to basically increase their warp engine capabilities by turning these beings into fuel, basically super deuterium batteries. Okay. So I wanted to kind of talk about those two episodes before I got into the synopsis of this one. Now, what's going on in this episode, Lost in Translation, man, is that the Enterprise and the Farragut, they roll up on this deuterium processing station that's inside of a deuterium nebula. And this deuterium station is offline. So the Farragut and the Enterprise are basically tasked to bring it back online, figure out what happened, and resume basically mining this nebula for deuterium, for fuel, basically. We get a chance to see the Buzzard hydrogen collectors in action. A lot of people think that the Buzzard hydrogen collectors are only capable of collecting hydrogen. No, they main purpose of the main configuration is hydrogen, which they use to convert to deuterium. But they could just straight up fly and pick up deuterium as they see fit. That being said, the Bazaar hydrogen collectors can also be outfitted to pick up pretty much any type of gas or that they want to pick up. The Bazaar hydrogen collectors have also been shown, especially like in the Next Generation, to be able to dispel these gases and plasma in a stream if it so chose to do so. Anyway, man, so the Enterprise takes this opportunity to decide to start um, getting refueled and everything like that and figure out what's going on with the station. Uhura at the same time starts to hear this, what she perceives as a message. When she reports this to the captain is like, hey, put it on, but there's no record of it. There's no history of her receiving a signal. Eventually, she starts seeing these images of, Hammer, the old engineer, but he's zombified out. She starts to see images of crew members dying, the Enterprise being destroyed, and the bridge, and everybody being sucked out of the bridge. Now, I'm going to take a side note to talk about that whole bridge thing. Now, it has never been shown in the original series canon that once there is a structural breach of the Enterprise, that the shielding would come up, basically replacing the bulkhead and holding the pressurization of the ship. The first time I can remember something like that happening was in the Next Generation. And the closest that I can get to where those types of safety shields were on board Starfleet vessels was on the Enterprise B, which was shown in what was it, Generations, I believe it was, where Kirk was blown out into space trying to get, trying to save the Enterprise B from that ribbon, and the whole saucer section was, I mean, not the whole saucer section, the whole deflector disc station was covered up with that shield. So when the nacelle exploded, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself, which I believe I am, because I was talking about the people needing seatbelts. Look, let me tell you something. Why don't they ever put seatbelts on the ship? Everybody always talking about seatbelts. They've made several jokes about the Enterprise not having seatbelts or starships not having seatbelts, but they have what's called an inertial dampening system, which basically is seatbelts on super steroids. They don't feel none of that stuff when they, unless they get hit with something that the computer couldn't adjust for. You know what I mean? So anyway, man, they start to try to figure out what's going on with Uhura. Uhura is smart enough to go and talk to Spock and like, yo, Spock, this is what's going on, man. What you think? Now, the thing about canon Starfleet, canon Star Trek, if you go up to any Starfleet officer and tell them the most crazy of things that you think is either going on or whatever, all right, it has never been an issue with Starfleet being like, hey man, it's very rare that something like that happened, but nah, man, that's crazy. No, Starfleet, if you tell a Starfleet officer something going crazy, man, they'll be like, yeah, the probabilities of that is kind of slim, but let's just check and make sure. You know what I mean? So it was kind of odd that Spock had the reaction that he did, but I understand they gave Lieutenant Kirk the opportunity to come in. Now, Kirk being as featured as much in Strange New Worlds as he's been. First, it's cool that they bring in Sam Kirk and what's going on with him, the relationship that Kirk had with him, because the only time that he was mentioned in Star Trek canon was in, I believe it was called Operation Annihilate, but we get a chance to go into Sam's history and everything with his brother before we pick up with the original series where he dies, right? And we don't really get to know him. I liked how they are going into Uhura as well, giving us a lot of backstory of her. I've mentioned that in the original series, there was never a first name given for Uhura. As a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, the first name of Uhura wasn't given up until J.J. Abrams in them movie reboots. Up until then, she has always just been Uhura, and it's interesting. And it's always something else interesting because Chekhov, everybody, Chekhov, Sulu, everybody had established full names in Star Trek. But they have to be careful when having Kirk be so prominent in Strange New Worlds because, again, in the Menagerie 1 and 2, Kirk really didn't know Pike like that. You know what I mean? Like, it was specifically asked, "Hey, man, have you ever met him?" Like, "Nah, man, I've heard a lot about him, but I've never met him." But here we are on this ship, doing that, which leads me to think, if there's a temporal war going on, could it be that some of the things from the original series have been changed or retconned as a result of the interferences, even on small, tiny scales, from the agents of the temporal war? That's something else that people probably have to consider. Anyway, Kirk and Uhura go through the process, and Sam go through the process of trying to figure this out, where they kind of make the assumption that these aliens that they are picking up, that Uhura is receiving a signal from, this is the only way they communicate. The signal that they're receiving is to sending for Uhura and this other guy that they find on the station who ended up sabotaging the station. They're too strong, and that's why it's burning people out and causing them to see these images. The three of them rather quickly figure out what the message is from the aliens, and when I say rather quickly, I'm talking about within like a minute. They done figured out what's going on, who did it, all this stuff, and that kind of set me back a little bit because it took a lot out of the investigating aspect of the episode. On a side note, when they was talking about Uhura having these issues from deuterium poisoning, the first thing I was thinking of was deuterium poisoning don't do that. Deuterium poisoning have you get all irate and have temperamental issues and be wanting to whoop everybody's ass. But then I remember, no, that's Xenite gas. Xenite gas has those issues, and we're going to talk about those deuterium poisoning thing, in which case I'm like, man, y'all haven't really did any good doctoring, to figure out what's going on really with Uhura. So y'all just gonna assume it's deuterium poisoning, but her brain scans is showing all this crazy stuff. Like, come on, Dr. Mbenga. Also in the meantime, you have Commander Pelia and Commander Una kind of going at it on the space station. And I like the way that Pelia is. If you think about her and Guinan, and I have no idea why Guinan and Pelia would not know each other, having lived centuries on Earth. That is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Anyway, though, I like how Pelia and how they also do Guinan with the the verses between intelligence and wisdom. Because Una, she was kind of, trying to pull rank and do all of that stuff and try to be like, oh, well, I know, what's best and everything. But Pelia has the age and experience, you know what I mean? So she's kind of like, she takes this as a grain of salt, like, you ain't hurt my feelings, man. You young, you know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna let you have these young ideas and act young and everything like that. We'll handle this a little bit later. And I like the way that they did handle it. It was kind of touching as to the reason why Una was feeling the way she did. And it's something that always happened in Star Trek, and one of the only times that it didn't happen this way was with Tasha Yar. But when people seem to die in Star Trek, seems like by the next episode or two, man, everybody carrying on with their day, and these people are usually never mentioned. I also like the way that they're bringing up Kirk's history before the Enterprise, because yes, he did serve on the Farragut. Yes, he was first officer of the Farragut. But I would like to see how they do what ends up happening with the crew of the Farragut and Kirk, especially when you get to episodes in the original series like Obsession, which goes over directly what happened with him and the Farragut and the entity that the Farragut encountered later in Star Trek. Yeah, Obsession, man, you guys got to check that out. I do like how they're trying to lay the groundwork for why Sam Kirk left Starfleet, or changed his profession from Starfleet to just be a Federation colonist or Federation scientist, which ended up leading him to the planet where we find him in Operation Annihilate. But I am glad that they have sort of a back and forth between him and his brother, and the effect that George Kirk had on both of them, both of their success and viewpoints as it pertains to Starfleet. The what was it, the JJ verse or whatever it was, the Kelvin timeline. It explored what happened when George was killed and they no longer had that influence. They didn't mention Sam though, probably because they didn't have a chance to have Sam, because Sam is the younger brother. So let's talk about how they portrayed these aliens. Now, I'm always fascinated when we run across aliens that we in Star Trek that we can't easily define or categorize, or things that we wouldn't necessarily view as a life form, and we get to explore that, you know what I mean, and expand the human horizons, right? But again, when we're looking at the episode and we could be like, hey, I think I know what's going on based on these other episodes that it seems like you guys drew on, right? It takes away that mystery, that curiosity, that excitement. You know what I mean? So, as the the coolness of how these aliens were so alien and how they were communicating with the crew and their needs and stuff like that. It For this episode, it was lost on me because they did it, I think, a little, I think, better in the Next Generation's Night Terrors. I think they explored using transdimensional deuterium-based life as fuel better in Equinox. And what another great thing about Star Trek is, Star Trek has always been at the forefront of presenting futuristic technology, futuristic ideas, and everything like that. So it was kind of interesting when Nurse Chapel and Spock, by the way, Nurse Chapel loves, she got like the biggest crush on Spock ever. Spock didn't feel that way about her at all. Like, he barely even knew. And if he did know, he didn't care about that. You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't sitting down having conversations with Nurse Chapel about any of that relationship type of stuff. So I'm wondering why they are deciding to do that. Why, as a matter of fact, why are they deciding to have Spock have a love interest like that? Spock has had several love interests, but they've only lasted one episode, right? Like, if you remember the lady from what was it? Episodes like All Our Yesterdays, or maybe like This Side of Paradise. Spock has had love interests, right? And times where his human emotional side was a lot more out in the open. But the way they got it with Nurse Chapel, nah, man, nah. But anyway, as I was saying about the conversation that they was having in Star Trek being on the forefront of science, right? They end up having this conversation about Schrodinger's cat, that theory, all right? And this was covered in SG1, which I always say most of the writers from the Next Generation and from the original series went over to start writing for Stargate SG1 because so many of the stories are so similar. So many of the villains are so similar, just with the tiniest, the minutest of alterations to the storyline or to the villain. But even in SG1, they was like they tried to explain Schrodinger's cat, and the alien that Sam was talking to was basically like, "Yeah, that's not how they work." But I think I understand what you're talking about. It's cool that in Star Trek they didn't just let that go. Like you ain't finna just give a outdated theory, right, or theorem about something, and you talking to a dude that's supposed to be the most high speed science dude in Starfleet, and he just gonna let that go. No, he explained, no, that ain't right because that's what Star Trek is. So everything ends up working out. I try not to include too much spoilers on this. Everything ends up working out. There's still that little will they or will they not between Lieutenant Soon and Captain Kirk. And again, how does Captain Kirk not know the name Soon when they got it going on like this? That he done just hung out with her, with Khan's granddaughter and all this kind of stuff. And look, I understand that if they run across Khan in Space Sea way later, he ain't gonna just be like, hey, I knew your granddaughter. Like for a while, they didn't even know this dude was Carnelian Soon. But when they did, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. But I do tell you what. It was two great things that I loved about this episode as far as how it ended. And those two things was this. First, it's nice to end the episode in VIX 2, in the VIX bar part 2, with the nice jazz atmosphere and everything like that. It even sounded like a song that would come from VIX. Also, Sam Kirk made this little statement about him writing a paper on these types of aliens, right? These transdimensional deuterium type aliens. I wonder if that was used or referenced in some way in Equinox or something like that, or in any future canon, because it was really interesting that they would write that in there. So, and the second thing about this episode was it just made me just giddy was the send off of just having young Kirk, young Spock, and young Uhura all sitting at the table with each other, enjoying a drink and having a laugh. You know what I mean? So overall, this episode, I liked it. It was very obvious what was going on in the episode. It leaned too much on the things going on in Equinox and the things going on in Night Terrors, but um it was okay. It was all right. It was all right. I think that they could do a little bit better. Anyway, tell me what you guys thought of the episode. Let me know in the comments. Leave a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And as always, man, peace, recycle, and say the whales. You guys be cool.